Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic that I guarantee will really change how you see yourself, your decisions, and pretty much everyone else around you. We're exploring that fascinating intersection where psychology meets economics, and we're specifically drawing some incredible insights from the book Humans and Econs, Biases and Blunders.
That's right. And our mission today really is to uncover how our brilliant minds, in their quest to navigate this complex world, often play some surprising tricks on us. We'll explore everything from visual illusions that fool even the smartest people to why you might tip more at a restaurant and how these mental tricks aren't necessarily a flaw. They're more a fundamental aspect of being, well, human.
Exactly. We're not here to judge human behavior as irrational or dumb. Far from it.
No, not at all. Our goal is to arm you with surprising facts and sort of foundational knowledge, helping you rethink everything from your daily decisions and leadership approaches all the way to how policies are designed. It's about understanding our predictable fallibility in a complex world, not condemning it. And to illustrate just how profound these mental quirks can be, let's start with a truly mind-bending example.
Okay, let's unpack this with a powerful hook. I want you to imagine, or if you can, maybe even try to find figure 1.1 from Roger Shepard's work, which is referenced in our source material. It shows two tables. One looks distinctly long and narrow, almost like a hallway table. The other appears shorter and wider, perhaps more like a, square coffee table. If you had to eyeball the ratio of length to width for each, what would you guess?
Most people, myself included, would say the one on the left is maybe 3 times as long as it is wide, and the one on the right, maybe 1.5 times. And here's where it gets really interesting. If you could, take out a ruler, measure them. You will find, to your astonishment, that the two tabletops are identical in shape and size. It's a classic case where seeing is absolutely not believing. One of the authors mentions when he first saw this illusion, he literally grabbed a chopstick to measure it himself because it just seemed so intuitively wrong.
It truly is mind-bending. My brain still tries to reconcile it, even after knowing the truth. So what does this tell us about how our brains typically operate?
Well, it tells us something incredibly profound. This astonishing illusion, and you can see it even clearer in figure 1.2 where the tabletops are shown without their legs and reoriented. It happens because the legs and the orientation in that first figure create a powerful visual distraction. Remove those distractors, and our visual system returns to its usual, remarkably accurate state. And this perfectly encapsulates the core insight of behavioral economics. The human mind generally works incredibly well. I mean, we can recognize faces we haven't seen in years, effortlessly navigate complex languages, or, run down stairs without falling. Some individuals can even master multiple languages, program advanced computers, or, like Albert Einstein, develop the theory of relativity.
And yet, even Einstein or a modern genius like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs would likely be fooled by those tables. It doesn't mean there's a defect in our brains, right?
Not at all. It just means that our understanding of human behavior can be profoundly improved by appreciating when and how we systematically deviate from purely logical predictions. It's not a bug, it's a feature of being, as the authors put it, certifiably human.
Precisely. We're not suggesting people are irrational or dumb. That's just unhelpful.
Right. The challenge is that we are fallible, and life itself is incredibly complex. If we tried to perfectly optimize every single decision, like calculating the absolute best combination of groceries every time we shop, we'd be paralyzed. We'd never even leave the store. Instead, to cope with this complexity, we rely on sensible shortcuts, what we call rules of thumb or heuristics.
And these rules of thumb are exactly where we uncover some of the most fascinating tricks our minds play. They're often incredibly handy, sometimes even humorous. I love the examples from Tom Parker's book, Rules of Thumb. He collected these amazing tidbits like, one ostrich egg will serve 24 people for brunch, or 10 people will raise the temperature of an average-sized room by 1 degree per hour. My favorite, given our subject today, no more than 25% of the guests at a university dinner party can come from the economics department without spoiling the conversation.
Brief chuckle. While undeniably useful, the very nature of these shortcuts can lead to systematic biases. This pivotal insight was first articulated decades ago by two groundbreaking psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Their heuristics and biases approach identified common rules of thumb like anchoring, availability, and representativeness, and the predictable biases associated with each. Their work fundamentally reshaped how we understand human judgment and decision-making.
Okay, let's start with anchoring and adjustment. This one is so common you see it everywhere once you know what to look for. The concept is that when we're trying to estimate something, we start with a known number, the anchor, and then adjust from it. But the bias comes in because our adjustments are almost always insufficient. Is that right?
That's it exactly. Imagine you're trying to guess the population of Milwaukee. If you're from Chicago, a large city of about 3 million, you might start with that as your mental anchor. You know Milwaukee is smaller, so you adjust down perhaps to say a million. Now, if you're from Green Bay, a city of around 100,000, you'd start there and adjust up, maybe to 300,000. The actual population of Milwaukee is around 590,000. So the Chicagoan guesses high, and the Green Bay resident guesses low, predictably biased by their starting anchor.
What's truly wild is that even irrelevant anchors can skew our thinking. They did this experiment where people were asked to think of the last 3 digits of their phone number. Okay? Then they were asked to guess when Attila the Hun sacked Europe, which was actually 452 AD. You'd think your phone number has absolutely nothing to do with ancient history. But students who started with high phone number digits gave answers that were, on average, hundreds of years later than those with low phone number digits. It's like our brains just latch onto any number, even a nonsensical one, and struggle to move far from it.
It's a really powerful effect. So if you're a choice architect, someone designing environments where people make decisions, anchors become this phenomenal nudge. Think about tipping in taxicabs, which the source material covers. Drivers were initially hesitant to adopt credit card machines because of, the processing fees. But those who did found their tips actually increased. Why? Because the default tip options on the screen, like 15%, 20%, 25%, acted as anchors. Many customers, when in doubt, just hit that middle option, which was often higher than what they would have given manually.
Right. And there was a study by behavioral economist Kareem Haggag that compared two cab companies,
Hmm.
one with 15%, 20%, 25% default, and another with 20%, 25%, 30%. The higher defaults did increase average tips and overall earnings for drivers, but surprisingly, they also led to an increase in zero-tip instances.
Yeah, that's the interesting twist. Some people, feeling maybe pressured or ordered around by the aggressive defaults, reacted with what we call reactance, essentially thinking, you're trying to tell me what to do, fine, you get nothing.
So it highlights a crucial nuance, doesn't it? Within reason, the more you ask for, the more you tend to get. You see this in negotiations, lawyers asking for huge sums.
Absolutely. Clever negotiators start high, lawyers sue for astronomical amounts to anchor juries. But like you said, that caveat about reactance is important. Don't push so hard that you alienate your audience.
Okay, moving from what we start with, let's consider another key shortcut. The availability heuristic. This describes how we assess the likelihood of an event by how easily examples or instances come to mind. It's about accessibility and salience, how vivid or easily recalled something is.
Here's a quick, stark example from the U.S. Are more gun deaths caused by homicides or suicides? Most people, because homicides are so heavily reported in the news, they're often more dramatic, would instinctively say homicides. But the reality is, suicides account for about twice as many gun deaths as homicides. The vivid, easily recalled nature of homicide stories biases our perception of the overall risk.
And this has profound implications, doesn't it? People might buy a gun for self-protection, yet statistically, they're significantly increasing the risk of a family member dying by suicide. The availability heuristic also explains why, after a major flood, purchases of flood insurance surge dramatically. But as those vivid memories recede, so do the insurance purchases. Our brains prioritize what's easily recalled, which doesn't always align with true statistical risk.
Exactly. And this can lead to misallocated resources in public policy, with governments sometimes focusing on highly publicized dangers rather than less vivid, but perhaps more common, threats. Like, think about nuclear power risks versus strokes or asthma attacks. Understanding availability bias means we can potentially nudge judgments back towards true probabilities. A simple reminder of a bad event might encourage precaution, while highlighting a successful outcome could boost confidence.
So we've seen how our initial mental anchors and the ease of recall can steer us wrong. But what about when our brains try to find patterns or similarities, especially when meeting new people? That brings us to our third bias, representativeness, or what you can think of as the similarity heuristic. We judge the likelihood of something by how similar it is to a stereotype or an image we hold in our minds. And often, this works pretty well. Stereotypes aren't always wrong, right?
True, they often capture some reality. But when that perceived similarity diverges from actual frequency, that's when biases creep in. The most famous illustration involves Linda the bank teller. Participants were given this description. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. End quote. Then they were asked to rank the probability of various futures for Linda, including bank teller and active in the feminist movement.
And overwhelmingly, people said bank teller and active in the feminist movement was more likely than bank teller alone. It's like a little voice that homunculus Stephen Jay Gould talked about is shouting, but you can't just be a bank teller, read the description. It's such a powerful intuitive pull.
It is. But logically, of course, this is a fallacy. All feminist bank tellers are, by definition, bank tellers. So the probability of Linda being just a bank teller has to be higher than, or at least equal to, her being a bank teller and a feminist. The error stems from how strongly Linda's description represents our stereotype of a feminist activist, leading us astray from the statistical truth.
So the real insight here isn't just a logic puzzle, it's that our minds, in their quest for efficiency, can trick us into ignoring basic statistical truths if a story or a description feels right or fits a perceived pattern. This affects everything from how we assess job candidates to how we interpret news stories about groups of people. It's an incredibly subtle but powerful bias.
Now, let's turn to a bias that most of us likely recognize in ourselves, maybe sometimes unwillingly: optimism and overconfidence. We have this pervasive tendency to be unrealistically optimistic about our abilities and our future.
It's truly widespread. One of our authors, when teaching a class, asks his MBA students to anonymously predict where they'll fall in the distribution of grades. Despite knowing that only 10% can be in the top decile, typically less than 5% expect to be below the median, and more than half expect to be in the top 2 deciles. The largest group often puts themselves in the second decile, probably out of, a humble desire not to appear too arrogant by picking the top one.
And it's not just MBA students. This above-average effect is everywhere. 90% of drivers think they're above average. Nearly everyone believes they have an above-average sense of humor. And in one study, about 94% of university professors thought they were better than the average professor. I think we can both probably admit to perhaps falling prey to that particular bias from time to time.
Oh, absolutely. And this unrealistic optimism persists even when the stakes are incredibly high. In the US, 40–50% of marriages end in divorce. That's a widely known statistic. Yet, almost all couples around the time of their wedding believe their own chance of divorce is nearly zero, even those who have already been divorced once. Samuel Johnson famously quipped that a second marriage is the triumph of hope over experience.
And this pervasive over-optimism can lead people to fail to take sensible preventive steps. We saw this during the 2020-2021 pandemic, where some people avoided mask wearing, perhaps due to an overly optimistic assessment of their personal risks. Though, interestingly, a simple nudge, like reminding people of a bad event, can often temper this over-optimism somewhat.
That's a powerful collection of predictable biases. They all highlight how our minds take shortcuts, sometimes leading us astray. Okay, let's shift gears a bit to how we resist, or sometimes fail to resist, temptation and how fundamental social forces shape us. Let's start with loss aversion. This is a big one, right?
Huge. People simply hate losses. Not just dislike them, but genuinely hate them. The prospect of losing something makes you roughly twice as miserable as the prospect of gaining the same thing makes you happy.
We can see this vividly in that simple coffee mug experiment.
Exactly. Half a class gets a coffee mug, the other half examines their neighbor's mugs. Then, the mug owners are asked how much they'd sell their mug for, and the non-owners how much they'd pay. Consistently, mug owners demand about twice as much to give up their mug as non-owners are willing to pay for one. This illustrates what we call the endowment effect. We don't assign absolute values to objects. Their value depends on whether we own them. Once it's yours, you don't want to give it up.
You see it with gambles, too. Like, if someone offers you a bet, has you win $6, tails you lose $100. For many people, X has to be around $200 for them to even consider taking the bet. That $200 gain is needed just to offset the misery of a potential $100 loss.
And loss aversion also fuels inertia, our strong desire to stick with what we have, which leads directly into status quo bias, our general tendency to stick with the current situation. For example, a study in the late 1980s found that the median number of changes participants made to their retirement savings asset allocation over their entire lifetime was zero. Zero. And many married participants who joined as singles still had their mothers listed as beneficiaries decades later. That's some serious inertia.
That's truly fascinating, and it's so easily exploited. One of our authors received these free 3-month magazine subscriptions from American Express. What he didn't realize was that unless he actively canceled, they would auto-renew at the normal rate. For over a decade, he kept paying for magazines he hardly read and mostly despised, simply due to inertia and the effort required to cancel. This, heuristic is everywhere now, especially with binge-watching TV. Most streaming services automatically play the next episode. Many viewers kind of mindlessly just keep watching.
Right. And that combination of loss aversion, the perceived loss of effort to cancel, and this sort of mindless choosing makes default options incredibly powerful nudges.
Building on that, let's consider framing effects. This highlights that our choices depend heavily on how a problem is described, even if the underlying content is identical.
Imagine you have serious heart disease and your doctor proposes a grueling operation. He says, of 100 patients who have this operation, 90 are alive after 5 years. Sounds pretty comforting, right? You'd likely feel confident about proceeding.
Yeah, it seems okay.
But what if he said, of 100 patients who have this operation, 10 are dead after 5 years? Suddenly it feels much more alarming. You think, wait, 10% are dead. I could be one of them. Even though 90 of 100 alive and 10 of 100 dead convey the exact same statistical information, people, even medical experts, react very differently to each frame.
The credit card companies figured this out way back in the 70s, didn't they?
They did. When retailers wanted to charge different prices for cash versus credit card companies successfully lobbied to frame the cash price as a discount rather than the credit price as the surcharge. They knew people would prefer getting a discount over paying a surcharge, even if the ultimate price difference was the same. This mindlessness, our tendency not to check for consistency across different frames, means that frames are incredibly potent nudges and must be chosen with extreme care.
All these biases lead us to a fundamental understanding of how we think through two systems. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate, famously articulated this with what he called System 1 and System 2. Though our authors prefer automatic system and reflective system, maybe it makes them a bit easier to remember.
Right, and this framework helps unravel a puzzle. How can humans be so brilliant at some tasks and, frankly, so clueless at others? Think of Beethoven composing the Ninth Symphony while deaf, yet perhaps misplacing his keys daily. Was he a genius or an imbecile?
Both, I guess.
Exactly. The automatic system is rapid, instinctive, effortless, and often unconscious. It's your gut reaction, tied to the older lizard parts of our brain. The reflective system is deliberate, effortful, slow, and self-aware. It's your conscious logical thought.
There's a great anecdote about one of the author's sons, Declan.
Oh, yes. When he was 9, he would urgently want to go into every toy store that's his automatic system screaming, even though his reflective system knew he had enough toys and would be bored with a new one in a day. He actually asked his dad, "Daddy, do I even have a system 2?"
That's a perfect example. When you duck instinctively from a thrown ball or feel nervous during turbulence, that's your automatic system. But calculating 411 times 317 or deciding between law school and business school, that engages your reflective system.
Yet, gut feelings from the automatic system can be incredibly accurate, especially for skilled individuals. Athletes, through countless hours of practice, train their automatic systems to perform with amazing accuracy and speed, often doing better when they trust the gut rather than overthinking.
Okay, to illustrate the interplay and sometimes conflict between these two systems, let's try the cognitive reflection test, the CRT. I invite you, the listener, to try these 3 questions. Maybe jot down the first answer that comes to mind for each.
Okay, first, a bat and ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
Second, you are one of 3 runners in a race. At the end, you overtake the runner who was in second place. In what place did you finish?
And third, Mary's mother had 4 children. The youngest 3 are named: Spring, Summer, and Autumn. What is the eldest child's name?
Okay, take a moment. What were your initial gut answers? For me, on that first one especially, my brain just screamed 10 cents. It feels so obvious. What's going on there? Why do so many of us fall for that immediate answer?
It's a classic example of our automatic system jumping to the most accessible but incorrect conclusion. Most people instinctively say 10 cents, first place, and winter. But if you pause and engage that reflective system, you'll quickly see they're all wrong. If the ball cost 10 cents and the bat was $1 more, it would be $1.10. Add them up, the total is $1.20, not $1.10. So the ball must cost 5 cents and the bat $1.05.
Oh.
If you overtake the second place runner, you finish in second place.
Right, you take their spot.
And Mary's mother already had 4 children named Spring, Summer, and Autumn, so the eldest child's name is Mary.
Our initial immediate answers come from that automatic system, the lizard inside, as they say. So the goal of understanding these systems and the underlying biases, it's not to become Mr. Spock, whose reflective system is always in control.
No, definitely not. It's more about designing environments, policies, and choices for Homo economicus, allowing us to rely more on our automatic systems without getting into terrible trouble. It's about making life easier, better, and longer for the Homer Simpson lurking within all of us.
Moving from how we think to how we act, especially when facing temptation, leads us to the idea of the planner versus the doer within each of us. There's that famous cashew nut anecdote.
Ah, yes, Taylor's dinner party. He put out a large bowl of cashews, saw his guests, all economists, mind you, were devouring them, potentially ruining their appetites. So he stealthily removed the bowl.
And when he returned, the guests actually thanked him, which seems weird from a standard economic view, right? Having fewer options made them better off.
Exactly. It defies basic economic principles, which say you can never be made worse off by having more options. Before, they could eat or not eat the cashews. Now they couldn't, yet they were happy. This is because their planner, the part wanting to enjoy dinner, was battling their doer, the part that couldn't resist the immediate temptation of the cashews. Removing the bowl solved the planner's problem.
This phenomenon is called dynamic inconsistency, right? We prefer A over B now, but later we choose B over A, like planning to run on Saturday, but come Saturday afternoon.
The couch wins.
Ah,
Exactly. The problem lies in temptation, which we consume more of when we're in a hot state, hungry, aroused, impulsive. The ancient story of Ulysses and the sirens is the classic example of recognizing this. Ulysses, in a cold, planning state, had his crew wax their ears and tie him to the mast so he could hear the irresistible song, but be physically restrained from steering the ship towards certain doom when the music put him into a hot, tempted state.
those are commitment strategies. They work when you can anticipate temptation and remove it or bind yourself beforehand. But a major challenge is the hot-cold empathy gap, identified by George Lowenstein.
That's right. When we're in a cold state, we simply underestimate how strongly our desires and behavior will be altered when we're in a hot, aroused state, like planning a diet when you're full versus facing dessert when you're hungry.
And we employ various self-control strategies. Externally, we make grocery lists, set alarm clocks, ask friends to stop us from having dessert. But doers are notoriously hard to control, aren't they? An alarm clock set by the planner might just get turned off by a sloopy doer.
Which led to inventions like the clocky alarm clock, the one that physically jumps off the nightstand and rolls away, making annoying sounds, forcing the doer to actually get out of bed to turn it off.
These strategies can be remarkably effective. Thaler helped a colleague, David, finish his PhD thesis using a commitment contract, didn't he?
Yes, David had to submit a chapter by a certain deadline or a $100 check he'd pre-written to my house. Thaler would be cashed, and Thaler would use the money to throw a party David wasn't invited to. This worked, even though the financial incentive from the university for finishing his PhD was much, much larger. The salience of losing $100 to his friend and the social embarrassment of not being invited to the party was a stronger, more immediate pain.
That same principle is behind services like Stick.com, where you make a pact with yourself and put money on the line.
And governments get involved too. They ban things like heroin, mandate behaviors like seatbelt use and retirement savings, or tax things like cigarettes and sugary drinks to combat internalities, the hidden harms we inflict on our future selves through impulsive or biased decisions. Even daylight saving time can be seen as a kind of self-control nudge. By changing the label of the hour, we effectively trick ourselves into waking up an hour earlier, saving energy, and enjoying more evening daylight.
And markets often provide self-control services too. Christmas savings clubs, which used to be popular, seem economically irrational. Weekly deposits, no withdrawals until year-end, practically zero interest.
Yet they thrived because they were commitment devices, like an adult piggy bank. The inability to withdraw was a feature, not a bug, helping people save for Christmas when their doer might otherwise spend the money.
It highlights this competition between firms to meet consumer demands, even if those demands aren't always strictly rational. Still, the Cinnabon example at O'Hare Airport perfectly captures this battle. Your planner might be heading for the healthy yogurt.
But the Cinnabon outlet intentionally blasts its irresistible aroma right into the walkway, targeting your doer. And let's be honest, the doer often wins that battle.
This leads us nicely into mental accounting, this implicit system we use for managing our personal finances, which often violates the purely logical principle of money being fungible, meaning it shouldn't have labels.
The Dustin Hoffman anecdote is perfect here. When he was a struggling actor, his friend Gene Hackman visited, and Hoffman asked for a loan. Hackman agreed, but then saw several mason jars on Hoffman's counter labeled rent, entertainment, food, some stuffed with money. When Heckman asked why he needed a loan with all that money around, Hoffman simply pointed to the empty food jar. That's mental accounting in action.
In pure economic theory, $20 is $20, regardless of the jar it's in. But like organizations with departmental budgets, households use mental accounts to control spending.
Exactly. Gamblers, for instance, often treat house money winnings they've just made very differently from their own funds, taking way more risks. This is why people might splurge on a windfall, but be incredibly careful with their accumulated savings.
These mental accounts, while maybe not rational in the strictest sense, are incredibly valuable. They seem to make life both more pleasurable and more secure for us humans.
Okay, so we've delved pretty deep into the individual quirks of our minds. But humans don't operate in a vacuum, do they? We are profoundly influenced by others, even if, as purely rational econs, we're supposed to be perfectly unsociable.
That's a critical point. While econs might learn from others if there's clear information, they don't follow fashion or conform just for conformity's sake. Humans, on the other hand, are easily swayed.
Absolutely. Massive social changes in markets and politics often begin with seemingly small social nudges. A prominent person's action, or maybe a committed individual gaining attention, can become a signal, a kind of permission slip for others. This can lead to a trickle that becomes a flood, especially now with social media amplifying things.
And this understanding is vital for choice architects. Anyone designing environments where people make decisions. Why? Because first, we learn from others, which is good, but we also pick up misconceptions. And second, social influence is one of the most powerful nudges available for good or for ill. Think about mask wearing during the COVID-19 pandemic. In some places, social influences strongly promoted it. In others, they strongly discouraged it. Simply telling people that a new norm is emerging can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. And social influences broadly fall into two categories:
Oh.
information and peer pressure. Information is when others' actions or thoughts convey what might be best for you to do or think. If everyone is picking up after their dogs on your street, you might assume that's the expected, maybe even the right thing to do. Peer pressure is when you care about what others think of you, leading you to conform to avoid disapproval or, gain favor. The bottom line is, humans are easily nudged by other humans, partly because we just seem to like to conform.
Let's talk about conformity directly. The classic example is Solomon Asch's line experiment from the 1950s. Imagine you're in a group, judging the length of lines on cards. It's ridiculously easy. But then on the fourth round, 5 other people in the group who are actually Confederates in the experiment give a clearly, obviously wrong answer. It's your turn. What do you do? Most of us think, oh, I'd be independent. I just state the truth.
But Ash's startling results showed something very different. People, when asked to decide on their own, almost never made a mistake. Yet, when everyone else gave an incorrect answer, people erred more than 1/3 of the time. Nearly 3/4 of participants went along with the group at least once, defying the evidence of their own senses.
Mm.
And remember, this was with strangers they'd never see again on a simple visual task.
Wow.
And this wasn't some isolated finding. Ash's experiments have been replicated across many countries, with similar high rates of conformity. It's almost as if, as the source says, people can be nudged into identifying a picture of a dog as a cat if enough other people before them have done so.
Why does this happen? Is it just pure peer pressure, not wanting to stick out?
It seems to be a mix. Partly information thinking, maybe they see something I don't, maybe my perception is wrong, and partly peer pressure, the simple desire not to face disapproval or look foolish. Brain imaging studies even suggest that in these settings, people might actually start to see the situation as everyone else does, indicating a genuine perceptual shift, not just outward compliance. And conformity decreases significantly when answers are anonymous, which confirms the role of peer pressure. Unanimous groups, even when clearly wrong, provide the strongest nudges.
Okay, Ash's experiments involved clear, unambiguous answers. But what about conformity in ambiguous situations? That's where Muzaffar Sharif's work comes in, using the autokinetic effect.
Right, in a completely dark room, a stationary pinpoint of light appears to move due to a perceptual illusion. Individuals asked to estimate how much it moved varied wildly in their judgments.
But when people made estimates in small groups,
Their individual judgments rapidly converged, quickly forming a stable group norm. Different groups, even starting from arbitrary points, form different yet stable and committed norms. This really highlights how similar groups or even nations can converge on very different beliefs and actions based on subtle initial variations or arbitrary starting points. Sharif also showed that a hidden Confederate who spoke very confidently could strongly influence the group's estimate, either inflating it or lowering it significantly. This demonstrates the confidence heuristic. We tend to assume confident speakers know what they're talking about.
That's such a vital lesson for leaders, isn't it? If you genuinely want unbiased opinions from your team, you absolutely have to ask for them independently and crucially before you state your own opinion. Otherwise, you risk inadvertently creating a conformity effect around your view.
Absolutely. And what's even more remarkable about Sharif's findings is that these group judgments became deeply internalized. People stuck to them, even when reporting alone a year later. And these norms even persisted across generations of new participants being introduced into the group, creating an arbitrary tradition that lasted long after the original instigators were gone. This collective conservatism helps explain why groups sometimes stick to established patterns, even when new needs or information arise.
So the question then becomes, can choice architects use this incredibly powerful social influence to nudge people in better directions?
That's the key question. And the unpredictability of cultural and political change often stems from exactly this dynamic. An experiment by Matthew Salganik, Peter Dodds, and Duncan Watts on music downloads illustrates this vividly. They created an artificial music market where participants could listen to and download obscure songs by unknown bands. Some participants could see how many times songs had been downloaded by others, the influence groups, while the control group saw no such information.
And the results?
Clear as day. Individuals in the influence groups were far more likely to listen to and download songs that had already gained some popularity. Early popularity mattered immensely. The identical song could be a massive hit in one world and a complete flop in another, simply due to the random judgments and subsequent downloads of the first few people who encountered it. This is an informational cascade where people rationally follow the choices of others, assuming they have information, even if their own preference isn't strong.
And that can be amplified by reputational cascades, right? Where people conform because they don't want to incur disapproval for liking the wrong thing.
Precisely. So after the fact, when we look back at the success of a particular musician, actor, or even politician, we're tempted to construct a narrative where their success was inevitable due to their unique skills or qualities. But this research strongly cautions against that hindsight bias. Small interventions, random chance, or even pure luck at a key early stage can lead to massive variations in final outcomes. The inevitable success story is often just a convenient fallacy. Social influences and simple luck play a much bigger role than we often perceive.
There's a hilarious and completely unintended example of social influence mentioned, the Seattle windshield pitting epidemic of 1954.
Oh yes, a classic. Reports of tiny pits appearing on car windshields started in one town north of Seattle, quickly spread through local media reports, leading to widespread public fear and contagion in Seattle itself. Thousands of windshields were reported damaged. Mayors got involved, even the president was alerted. Scientists were called in to investigate, only to eventually conclude that the pits had been there all along, resulting from normal driving, but no one had noticed them until now. It was a collective mass delusion, fueled entirely by initial observation and rapid social spreading.
That is wild. It really shows the power of suggestion. This brings us to identity-based cognition, how people self-understanding their nationality, culture, politics shapes how they respond to social influence. It's either, oh, people like me do that, I should too, or conversely, oh, thank goodness I'm not like those people.
A really powerful positive example is Texas's famous Don't Mess with Texas anti-littering campaign back in the 80s. Traditional Please Don't Litter campaigns had failed, especially with the target group, young men aged 18 to 35. So the state officials crafted this tough-talking slogan, explicitly targeting Texas pride and identity, and listing Dallas Cowboys football players and country music icon Willie Nelson in the ads.
And it worked.
Amazingly well. A 29% reduction in visible roadside litter in the first year and 72% within 6 years. All without mandates or fines, just a creative, identity-aligned social nudge. The key lesson is that nudges using social influence seem most promising when people learn from and want to act like people who are like them and whom they trust, tapping into these provincial norms.
This also relates to pluralistic ignorance, that situation where individuals are ignorant about what most other people actually think. We might follow a practice or stay silent because we think everyone else approves of it, even if privately most people don't.
Exactly. It's like the Emperor's New Clothes story in real life. The child's simple, honest observation, but he isn't wearing anything at all, provides a permission slip for everyone else to finally reveal their true perception, breaking the spell of conformity. Many modern social movements seem to gain momentum this way. Visible actions, often amplified by social media, think #MeToo or #Black Lives Matter, can give people the courage to reveal long-silenced anger or outrage, transforming widespread but previously hidden dissent into powerful public cascades for change.
There was a fascinating experiment in Saudi Arabia about this.
Yes, involving male guardianship and female labor participation. Researchers found that many young married men privately favored allowing women to work, but wrongly believed that other young men strongly opposed it. When this misperception about the social norm was corrected, when they learned that their peers actually shared their private views, they became far more willing to authorize their wives to work, and more wives subsequently applied for jobs. Simply correcting the misperception about the social norm triggered significant behavioral change.
So, the general lesson about social norms as nudges is really clear. Informing people about what others are actually thinking and doing can be extremely effective.
The Minnesota tax compliance experiment showed this beautifully. Taxpayers were sent different messages encouraging them to pay. Only one message significantly increased payment, being truthfully told that more than 90% of Minnesotans already complied with their tax obligations. This corrected a common misperception that tax cheating was widespread. Similarly, in the UK, sending letters to late taxpayers stating 9 out of 10 people in the UK pay their tax on time. You are currently in the very small minority. Increased payment rates by a significant 5 percentage points at almost negligible cost.
And making it even more local, like mentioning Manchester, made it even stronger.
Yes, localizing the norm, making it about people like you in your town amplified the effect.
And we see this with things like hotel towel reuse studies, too. The most effective signs weren't just environmental pleas, but ones saying something like, join your fellow guests. Almost 75% of guests who stayed in this hotel helped by using their towels more than once.
Exactly. And it was even more effective when the sign mentioned guests who stayed in the same room. That provincial norm, that peer pressure from people very specifically like you, is incredibly real and influential.
This brings us to a major historical cascade mention, the incredibly rapid global shift toward legalizing same-sex marriage. When the original edition of the book came out around 2008, this was still highly contentious in many places.
That's right. The authors initially proposed a different solution, focused on civil unions. But the world took a different path, and did so with, as they say, uncommon speed. You had President Obama publicly changing his mind in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruling legalizing it nationwide in 2015, and by 2021, over 30 countries had followed suit. For generations, the idea would have been unthinkable to most citizens in these places, yet suddenly, often with surprisingly little controversy at the end, it became law.
Why such a swift and widespread change? What were the key drivers?
Well, a full answer is complex, but the authors highlight two crucial factors related to social influence. First, the simple, courageous act of many gays and lesbians coming out of the closet over preceding decades. Each personal revelation, especially when involving family members of influential figures, acted as a small but powerful nudge, gradually changing perceptions and opening the floodgates. Second, social influences were clearly critical. Both informational cascades, people seeing acceptance grow, and updating their own views and reputational cascades were at play. A statement that was once punished by old norms saying, I support same-sex marriage, suddenly became accepted, even rewarded by new emerging norms. The perception that the norm was changing helped to make it change. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It really illustrates how powerful these social forces can be and how they can be channeled intentionally or unintentionally towards significant social good.
Absolutely. Businesses and governments are already using these principles every day, sometimes obviously, sometimes subtly. And the potential to use them more effectively for promoting positive causes is immense.
Wow. We've covered a truly incredible amount of ground today. As we've gone through this, I'm just struck by how many of these biases and effects I recognize in my own thinking and behavior. It's truly incredible how consistently our minds work these little tricks on us. From the very start, we set out to explore how our busy minds cope in a complex world, using these sensible rules of thumb. And we've seen how these shortcuts, while mostly efficient, can systematically lead us astray, making our choices predictably influenced in ways that standard economic models just wouldn't anticipate. In short, as you said, we are profoundly nudgeable.
Precisely. We've journeyed from those mind-bending visual illusions that fool our basic senses to the subtle but strong pull of anchors, the ease with which availability biases our perception of risk, the sometimes misplaced confidence we put in stereotypes via representativeness, and our, well, relentless optimism. We've explored the inner conflict between our impulsive automatic system and our deliberate reflective system, and how self-control problems lead us to adopt commitment strategies, both personal ones like clocky alarms and government-backed ones like savings mandates. And finally, we saw how deeply social dynamics, conformity, identity, norms drive everything from the music we download to how we vote, and even shape massive societal shifts like the acceptance of same-sex marriage.
So the big question then, what does all of this mean for you, our listener, listening in right now?
Well, I think it means that understanding these systematic tricks of the mind, this interplay of your automatic and reflective systems, is absolutely crucial, really in all walks of life. For leaders, it means recognizing these biases in your teams, your customers, your constituents, how you frame decisions, how you set default options, how you leverage social norms. All of this can have a profound, maybe unseen impact. For policymakers, it drives home the importance of designing policies not for mythical, perfectly rational econs, but for actual Homer economicus, making life easier and safer by accounting for our predictable human tendencies. Think of those simple speed strikes painted on Chicago's Lakeshore Drive, getting closer together to nudge drivers to slow down just by creating the sensation of increased speed. Simple, cheap, effective.
And for your everyday life, what's the takeaway there?
I think awareness is the first most powerful step. Just recognizing when your automatic system might be jumping to a conclusion, or when you might be influenced by an anchor or a frame, gives your reflective system a fighting chance to intervene. It's not about trying to transform yourself into a perfectly logical econ that sounds exhausting and probably impossible. It's more about making smarter choices that align with your own long-term planner, while still embracing all the wonderful, sometimes frustrating quirks of being human.
As we wrap up this deep dive, maybe we can leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Consider this. We've seen today how powerful seemingly small nudges can be, whether it's a default option on a form, a confident voice in a meeting, or just the perceived actions of the crowd around you. So the question for you is, in what small everyday ways are you being nudged without fully realizing it? And maybe more profoundly, what seemingly obvious truths or established patterns in your own life or in the world around you might be revealed as mere illusions, like those tables if you only paused, took out a ruler, and measured for yourself by engaging that often dormant reflective system.
Something to think about. Keep observing, keep questioning, and keep thinking. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.